Hell's Angel sees a blind boy singing to save his mom. What he does next is unbelievable. The morning air nipped at Lucas's cheeks as he settled onto the cold concrete curb outside May's cafe. His oversized jacket, a hand-me-down from a neighbor, rustled in the gentle breeze. The familiar scents of coffee and fresh-baked bread wafted through the cafe's door each time it opened, mixing with the crisp autumn air. Lucas's fingers found their place on the guitar strings, the worn wood smooth and comforting against his chest. The instrument had been his father's, one of the few things they'd kept after he passed. Every nick and scratch told a story he could feel, but never see. "This is for you, Mom," he whispered, his words carried away by the wind. His mother's favorite song was one she used to sing while doing the dishes or folding laundry, back before the illness took hold. Now their house was too quiet, filled only with the sound of her labored breathing and the tick of the clock counting down precious minutes. Lucas took a deep breath, letting the cool morning air fill his lungs. His hands trembled slightly as he positioned his fingers on the first chord. The weight of their mounting medical bills pressed down on his shoulders, making him feel so much older than his 14 years. He began to play, his fingers dancing across the strings with practiced ease. The first notes floated into the air, tentative at first, like birds testing their wings. Then his voice joined in, soft and clear in the morning stillness. "When darkness falls, and hope seems far away, I'll be the light that guides you home to stay." The words caught in his throat, thick with emotion, but he pushed through. Each verse carried memories of his mother's smile, of her gentle hands brushing his hair back from his face, of the way she used to dance around their tiny kitchen. As he sang, the morning chill seemed to fade. Lucas could feel the sun warming his face, its rays painting pictures he could only imagine. The familiar melody wrapped around him like a blanket, bringing both comfort and pain. His voice grew stronger with each line, carrying years of love and worry in every note. "Through storms and rain, through joy and pain, I'll keep you safe until we meet again." His fingers moved automatically across the strings, muscle memory taking over where sight couldn't guide him. The song was as much a part of him as his own heartbeat, each chord resonating with the desperate hope that somehow someone would hear and understand. The usual morning sounds of the small town, footsteps on sidewalks, car doors closing, quiet conversations, seemed to fade into the background. Lucas could sense people pausing in their routines, their attention drawn to his song. But he kept his head down, focusing on the music, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in his stomach. As he neared the end of the song, his voice began to waver. The reality of their situation crashed over him again. The stack of unpaid bills on their kitchen table, the way his mother tried to hide her, pain, the countless nights he'd lain awake listening to her cry. The final verse came out as barely more than a whisper, his fingers trembling against the strings. The last chord hung in the air, fragile and pleading. In the distance, the rumble of motorcycles broke through the morning quiet, but Lucas barely registered the sound. He was lost in the echo of the song, in memories of better days, in the fear that this desperate attempt wouldn't be enough. Around him he could hear the soft murmur of voices as a crowd began to gather, their whispers carrying a mix of sympathy and curiosity. But Lucas remained still, his head bowed over his guitar, his heart heavy with the weight of what felt like an impossible task. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story." The rumble of motorcycles grew louder, vibrating through the sidewalk where Lucas sat. The sound echoed off the brick walls of the cafe, making his chest thrum with each rev of the engines. He could feel people backing away, their shoes scraping against the concrete as the bikes pulled into the parking lot. Lucas kept singing, his fingers steady on the guitar strings despite the intimidating noise. His mother's favorite song flowed from his lips, carrying all his worry and hope into the crisp morning air. The words told a story of perseverance through hard times, just like what they were facing now. The motorcycles fell silent one by one. Heavy boots hit the pavement, and Lucas heard leather creaking as the riders dismounted. The smell of exhaust and cigarette smoke drifted his way. Someone whistled low, and a few murmurs rippled through what remained of his audience. Frank Grizzly O'Shea stood rooted to the spot, his hand still resting on the handlebar of his bike. The boy's voice caught him off guard. There was something pure about it, something that cut straight through his hardened exterior. The song spoke of better days ahead, but the slight tremor in the kid's voice told a different story. This wasn't just street performance. This was desperation. The burly biker studied Lucas more closely. The boy's clothes were worn but clean, his guitar old but well cared for. Dark glasses covered his eyes, and his head tilted slightly as he played, in the distinctive way of someone who couldn't see. Despite the chill in the air, the kid's fingers moved smoothly across the strings, never missing a note. Frank's weathered face tightened as memories he'd long buried began to surface. His own son had loved music too, before. He pushed the thought away, but couldn't shake the feeling that fate had led him here this morning. "Hey, Grizzly," one of his riders called out. "We going in or what?" Frank held up a hand, silencing him. The other bikers exchanged looks but stayed quiet, knowing better than to question their leader when he had that expression on his face. The crowd around Lucas had thinned considerably when the motorcycles arrived, but those who remained watched with a mixture of concern and curiosity. They knew who Frank was. Everyone in town did. His reputation preceded him, and not in a good way. Lucas finished another verse, his voice carrying clear and true across the parking lot. Frank's hand moved to his jacket pocket, where he kept his checkbook. He'd been planning to use that money for other purposes. Purposes his associates wouldn't be happy about him changing. But looking at this blind boy, singing his heart out for his sick mother, Frank knew what he had to do. Without a word to his crew, Frank strode towards Lucas. His heavy boots crunched on the gravel, and he noticed how the boy's head turned slightly toward the sound, though he didn't stop singing. Frank knelt down beside him, the leather of his jacket creaking as he moved. He pulled out his checkbook and a pen, writing quickly and decisively. The remaining onlookers gasped as they caught sight of the amount he was writing. Frank tore the check free with a sharp rip. "This is for your mom," he said gruffly, his voice low and gravelly. He pressed the check into Lucas's hand. "Don't stop singing." The crowd's murmurs faded into a hushed silence as Lucas held the check between trembling fingers. His throat felt tight, and his heart hammered against his chest like a drum. Though he couldn't see the numbers written on the paper, he could feel the weight of what this meant. A chance for his mother to get better, to live. "Sir?" Lucas called out, his voice cracking. "Mr. O'Shea?" But the sound of boots on pavement told him Frank was already walking away. The rumble of motorcycles filled the air again as the bikers prepared to leave. An older woman from the crowd stepped forward, her shoes clicking on the sidewalk. "Dear," she said softly, placing a gentle hand on Lucas's shoulder. "Would you like me to read the amount for you?" Lucas nodded, still clutching the check tightly. Oh my," the woman gasped. "It's exactly what you needed, $35,000. The crowd erupted in whispers. Lucas could hear their voices mixing together. Some amazed, others suspicious. His fingers traced the edges of the check again and again, as if trying to make sure it was real. "But why would he?" Lucas whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The morning air felt colder now, and he pulled his oversized jacket tighter around himself. The sound of motorcycle engines roared to life, then gradually faded into the distance. With shaking hands, Lucas carefully folded the check and tucked it into his jacket's inside pocket, right next to his heart. He gathered his guitar, got to his feet, and picked up his white cane. The crowd parted to let him through, their chatter following him down the street. The walk home seemed longer than usual. Each tap of his cane against the concrete reminded him of the check in his pocket. Hope and fear twisted together in his stomach like tangled strings. The money would save his mother. That's what mattered most. But why would a stranger, especially one who looked so dangerous, help them? Lucas counted his steps as he always did, turning at the familiar corners that led home. The scent of Mrs. Peterson's roses told him he was nearly there. 18 more steps to the front porch. 12 more to the door. Inside, the house was quiet, except for the soft whir of his mother's humidifier. Lucas carefully placed his guitar in its usual spot by the door and made his way to her bedroom, his hand trailing along the wall. "Mom?" he called softly, hearing her shift in her bed. "Lucas?" Sarah's voice was weak but warm. "You're back early. Did something happen?" He moved closer until he found the edge of her bed, sinking down beside her. The mattress dipped under his weight, and he felt her hand reach for his. "Mom, something incredible happened today." He pulled out the check with his free hand. "A man. He gave us the money. All of it. For your treatment." "What?" Sarah's voice sharpened with surprise. "Who? How?" Lucas explained about the biker, about how he'd appeared out of nowhere and given them exactly what they needed. As he spoke, he felt his mother's hand tighten around his. Her breathing changed, becoming more rapid. "Mom?" Lucas asked, hearing the worry in her silence. "Isn't this good news?" Sarah's hand trembled slightly in his. "Lucas," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing this big comes without strings attached. Nothing." The morning sun filtered through the cafe windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Lucas stood outside, his white cane tapping gently against the concrete as he gathered his courage. The familiar scent of coffee and bacon wafted through the air, mingling with the sharp smell of leather and motor oil that seemed to follow the bikers everywhere. Taking a deep breath, Lucas pushed open the door. The bell chimed softly, and conversations hushed for a moment before resuming. He could hear the low rumble of male voices coming from the corner booth, punctuated by occasional laughter. "Excuse me," Lucas said, his voice barely above a whisper. The conversations died down again. "I'm looking for Mr. O'Shea, Frank." "Over here, kid," came the gruff response he recognized from yesterday. Heavy boots scraped against the floor as Frank stood up. "Boys, give us a minute." Lucas heard the shuffle of leather jackets and boots as the other bikers moved away. Frank's large hand gently touched his elbow, guiding him to sit. "Thank you," Lucas began, his hands fidgeting in his lap. "For yesterday, I mean. The check. It's going to help my mom so much. I don't know how to thank you properly." "You don't need to thank me," Frank replied, his voice softer than Lucas expected. The clink of a coffee cup against its saucer punctuated the silence. "You're singing. It reminded me of something. Someone." Lucas tilted his head, picking up on the change in Frank's tone. There was a weight to his words, a heaviness that spoke of old pain. "I used to have a boy," Frank continued, clearing his throat. Tommy. He loved music just like you do. Could barely keep him away from his guitar. He paused, and Lucas heard him take a shaky breath. He would have been about your age now. Lucas's hand instinctively reached across the table, finding Frank's rough, calloused fingers. The big man didn't pull away. What kind of music did he play? Lucas asked softly. A low chuckle rumbled from Frank's chest. Everything. Country, rock, even tried his hand at classical. Kid had talent, real talent. Pride colored his voice, though tinged with sadness. Used to play right here in this cafe sometimes, just like you were doing outside yesterday. The waitress approached, her shoes squeaking against the floor. More coffee, Frank? Please, Marie. And get the boy here a hot chocolate. Lucas smiled, warming to Frank's unexpected kindness. Did Tommy write his own songs? Yeah, he did. Frank's voice grew quiet. Had notebooks full of them. Said he was going to be famous one day. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the cafe buzz continuing around them. Lucas sipped his hot chocolate when it arrived, the warm sweetness spreading through his chest. Maybe. Lucas hesitated, then pressed on. Maybe I could play for you sometime, if you'd like to hear some music again. The silence that followed felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. Finally, Frank spoke, his voice rough with emotion. Yeah, kid, I think I'd like that. Lucas stood up, gripping his cane. I should get back to Mom, but thank you again, Mr. O'Shea. Frank, the big man corrected. Just call me Frank. Lucas nodded, smiling. As he made his way to the door, he felt lighter somehow, as if he'd found something he didn't even know he was looking for. Lucas's cane tapped gently against the cafe floor as he made his way inside. The morning rush had passed, leaving behind the smell of coffee and fresh-baked muffins. His ears picked up the soft clink of a coffee cup from the corner. He'd learned to recognize Frank's presence by the way he stirred his coffee. Slow and deliberate. Frank? Lucas called out softly. Is that you? Yeah, kid. It's me. Frank's voice sounded different today, heavier, like he was carrying a weight in his words. Lucas carefully made his way to the table, his hand finding the back of the chair. Mind if I join you? Go ahead. The chair scraped against the floor as Frank pushed it out for him. Lucas settled into the seat, folding his cane and placing it on the table. The silence between them felt different from their previous encounters. It wasn't the uncomfortable silence of strangers anymore, but something deeper, more meaningful. Mom's doing better, Lucas said, breaking the quiet. The doctors say she can start treatment next week. I never properly thanked you. Frank's coffee cup clinked against its saucer. Don't mention it. But I want to know why, Lucas pressed gently. You said something about your son? The silence that followed was so long that Lucas wondered if Frank was still there. Then came a deep, shaky breath. His name was Tommy, Frank said, his voice barely above a whisper. He was 12 when... He stopped, cleared his throat. He loved music too, used to play the piano, could pick up any tune just by hearing it once. Lucas heard Frank shift in his seat, the leather of his jacket creaking. What happened to him? He asked softly. Car accident. Frank's words came out rough, like they were being dragged across broken glass. I was driving. It was raining. Some guy ran a red light and... He fell silent again. Lucas reached across the table, his hand finding Frank's coffee cup, then moving until he found Frank's hand. It was rough and calloused, but it trembled slightly under his touch. After that, everything fell apart, Frank continued. His mother couldn't look at me anymore. I couldn't look at myself. So I just Left. Found the bikers. Figured if I couldn't be a good man anymore, I might as well be a tough one. But you are good, Lucas said firmly. What you did for my mom and me. That money, Frank cut in, his voice tight. It's complicated, kid. I'm not the hero you think I am. I don't need you to be a hero, Lucas said. Just be here. Talk to me like this. That's enough. Frank's hand turned under Lucas's, gripping it for a moment before letting go. You remind me of him sometimes, not just the music, but the way you see things. Tommy always saw the good in people, too, even when they couldn't see it themselves. Lucas heard the pain in Frank's voice, the years of running and hiding from his grief. He understood now why this tough biker had stopped to help a blind boy singing on the street. Sometimes the biggest acts of kindness came from the deepest places of pain. Will you tell me more about Tommy? Lucas asked. I'd like to know what he was like. He heard Frank take another shaky breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer than Lucas had ever heard it. Lucas pushed open the front door, his hand trailing along the familiar wall as he made his way inside. The house felt different today, heavier somehow. The usual sounds of his mother moving around were missing, replaced by an unsettling quiet. Mom? He called out, his voice wavering slightly. A weak cough answered from her bedroom. In here, sweetheart. Lucas carefully navigated the hallway, his heart pounding faster with each step. When he reached her room, the smell of medicine was stronger than usual. He could hear her labored breathing from the doorway. The new treatment. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. It's not working like we hoped. The doctor says we might need to try something else. Lucas sat on the edge of her bed, finding her hand and holding it tight. Her skin felt clammy and too warm. How bad is the pain today? I'm managing, she said, but her voice cracked on the last word. Don't worry about me. But Lucas did worry. He worried constantly. The weight of helplessness pressed down on his shoulders, making it hard to breathe. There was only one person he could think to turn to now. Later that afternoon, Lucas made his way to the cafe where he knew Frank usually sat. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and someone, probably the waitress, guided him to Frank's usual corner table. Frank? Lucas asked tentatively. Yeah, kid, I'm here. Frank's voice sounded different, strained, like he was carrying a heavy burden of his own. Lucas slid into the booth across from him. My mom. She's getting worse. The treatment isn't working. I didn't know who else to ask for help. The silence that followed felt endless. Lucas could hear Frank's fingers drumming nervously on the table, could sense his unease in the way he shifted in his seat. Listen, kid, Frank finally said, his voice low and rough. About that money I gave you? He paused, letting out a heavy sigh. It wasn't exactly mine to give. Lucas's stomach dropped. What do you mean? That money? It was part of something bigger. A favor for some people. People you don't want to know about. Frank's voice grew quieter, more serious. I thought I could handle it. Thought I could make it right, but what? Lucas leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. There's always a price, kid. Always. And in my world, that price usually comes due with interest. Frank's chair creaked as he leaned closer. You need to understand something. Getting involved with people like me, it's not just about the money. There are consequences. Dangerous ones. Lucas felt the color drain from his face. What kind of consequences? The kind you don't want to know about, Frank replied firmly. The kind that keep me up at night. I shouldn't have dragged you into this, but... His voice softened slightly. Seeing you there, singing, it reminded me so much of my boy. I wasn't thinking straight. Lucas sat there, trying to process what Frank was telling him. The hope he'd been clinging to started to crumble, replaced by a cold fear he couldn't quite name. "Don't ask any more questions," Frank said quietly but firmly. "The less you know about this, the better. Just be careful, kid. Real careful." Lucas sat at his usual spot outside the cafe, his guitar resting across his lap. The morning air felt heavier than usual, filled with the weight of Frank's warning from the day before. His fingers traced the smooth wood of his guitar, not playing, just feeling its familiar comfort. The sound of Frank's motorcycle rumbled in the distance. Lucas knew it was his. He'd learned to recognize the distinct pitch of its engine. But something was different today. The usual confident roar seemed weaker, more hesitant. "Morning, Frank," Lucas called out as the bike pulled up. He couldn't see Frank's face, but he could sense something was wrong. The heavy footsteps that approached him dragged slightly, lacking their usual purpose. "Hey, kid." Frank's voice was rough, tired. He dropped onto the bench beside Lucas with a heavy sigh that spoke of sleepless nights and worried days. Lucas set his guitar aside. "You don't sound good." "Just tired, that's all." Frank tried to brush it off, but Lucas heard the strain in his voice. "No," Lucas said firmly. "Something's wrong. I might be blind, but I can hear it in your voice." He turned toward Frank. "You helped me and my mom when nobody else would. Let me help you now." Frank let out a short, bitter laugh. "You're just a kid, Lucas. This isn't your fight." "Maybe not," Lucas agreed, "but I'm not just any kid. I know what it's like when people think you can't do anything because of what you are, or aren't." His hands found his guitar again, running along its edges. "Being blind taught me to listen. Really listen. And right now I'm hearing someone who needs a friend." The silence that followed was long, broken only by the distant sound of cars passing by. Finally, Frank spoke, his voice quieter than Lucas had ever heard it. "You remind me so much of him sometimes. My boy, he would have been about your age now." Lucas nodded, encouraging Frank to continue. "I've been trying to protect you, Lucas. Keep you away from the mess I'm in. But maybe—" Frank's voice cracked slightly. "Maybe you're the one protecting me." "That's what friends do," Lucas said simply. He reached out, finding Frank's arm with surprising accuracy. "Whatever's coming, whatever trouble you're in, you don't have to face it alone." "You don't know what you're saying, kid." "I do," Lucas insisted. "You gave us hope when we had none. Now it's my turn." He squeezed Frank's arm. "I promise you, Frank, I won't let anything happen to you." The silence that followed was different this time. Lighter, somehow. Lucas heard Frank shift beside him, felt the gentle pat on his shoulder. When Frank finally spoke, his voice had changed. There was warmth there and something else. Gratitude. "You know what, kid?" Frank said softly, and Lucas could hear the smile in his voice. "I believe you." The evening air grew cooler as Lucas and Frank walked side by side toward the cafe. Street lamps flickered to life, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Lucas could sense Frank's steady presence beside him, the familiar sound of his heavy boots on the concrete, and the slight rustle of his leather jacket with each step. A car engine purred nearby, breaking the peaceful quiet. Lucas heard tires crunching on gravel as the vehicle pulled up close to them. Frank's footsteps stopped abruptly. "Well, well," a smooth, cold voice cut through the evening air. "If it isn't Frank Grizzly O'Shea himself." Lucas felt Frank tense beside him. The air suddenly felt thick with tension, like the heaviness before a storm. "Tony," Frank's voice was low and controlled. "What are you doing here?" Footsteps approached them slowly, deliberately, Lucas could hear the tap of expensive shoes on the pavement. When Tony spoke again, his voice was closer, dripping with false warmth. "Can't a man check up on an old friend?" Tony asked. "Especially one who's been making such interesting choices lately." Frank's hand found Lucas's shoulder, gently pushing the boy behind him. "This isn't the time or place, Tony." "Oh, I think it's exactly the right time," Tony said. His voice hardened. "That money you gave away, that wasn't yours to give." Lucas's heart began to race. He could feel the tension radiating from Frank's body, could hear the slight change in his breathing. "I made good on that deal," Frank growled. "We're square." Tony laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Square? No, Frank, we're far from square. You see, that money came with strings attached, big ones, and now it's time to pay up." "I'm done with that life," Frank said firmly. "Nobody's ever done." Tony's voice dropped dangerously low. "Especially not you, Grizzly. Not with your history. Not with what you've done." Lucas felt Frank's grip on his shoulder tighten slightly. "I need you for one last job," Tony continued. "Something that requires your particular set of skills." "Not interested," Frank's reply was immediate. "Oh, but you should be." Tony's footsteps circled them slowly. "Because if you're not, well, it would be a shame if certain information about your past came to light. And it would be even more unfortunate if anything happened to your new friends here." Lucas felt his blood run cold at the threat. Frank's body went rigid. "The boy and his mother." Tony's voice was almost gentle now, which made it all the more frightening. "They seem like nice people. It would be terrible if they got caught up in all your old business, wouldn't it?" "Leave them out of this." Frank's voice was dangerous, barely controlled. "That's entirely up to you, old friend," Tony said. "You help me with this one thing, and they stay safe. You don't—" He left the threat hanging in the air. Lucas could hear Tony's footsteps moving away, back toward his car. "Think about it, Frank. But don't think too long. I'll be in touch." The car door opened and closed. The engine revved, and the sound of tires on pavement gradually faded into the distance, leaving Lucas and Frank standing in the growing darkness, the weight of Tony's threats hanging heavy between them. The morning sun filtered through the trees as Lucas sat on his front porch, his fingers absently strumming his guitar. The melody wasn't cheerful today. It carried the weight of his worries. His ears picked up the familiar rumble of Frank's motorcycle before it came to a stop in front of his house. "Lucas," Frank's gravelly voice called out. "We need to talk." Lucas set his guitar down carefully and stood up. "I've been thinking about Tony." "Stop right there," Frank cut him off, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. "This isn't your fight. You need to stay away from this mess." "But I can help," Lucas protested, his hands clenching into fists. "I'm not just some helpless kid." Frank let out a deep sigh, and Lucas heard him settle onto the porch railing. "This isn't about being helpless. These are dangerous people, Lucas, the kind you don't want to know about." "I already know about them," Lucas argued, "and they know about me. Staying away won't change that." The silence that followed was heavy. Lucas could hear Frank's leather jacket creaking as he shifted his weight. "Please," Lucas said softly. "At least teach me how to protect myself." "And Mom." Another long pause followed. Lucas could almost feel Frank's internal struggle. Finally, Frank spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "Your mother would kill me." "She doesn't have to know," Lucas said quickly. "We could practice somewhere private." "Kid, you don't give up, do you?" Frank's words carried a mix of frustration and admiration. "No," Lucas said firmly. "I don't." Frank stood up, his boots scraping against the wood. "There's a clearing in the woods, about a mile outside town. Meet me there tomorrow at dawn." Lucas's heart leapt. "Really?" "Yeah, really. But we do this my way. No questions asked, and you follow every instruction exactly. Deal?" Lucas nodded eagerly. "Deal." "And Lucas?" Frank's voice grew serious. "This isn't about fighting. It's about staying alive, understanding your surroundings, knowing when to run, and how to get help if things go bad." "I understand," Lucas said solemnly. "Good. Pack some water and wear comfortable clothes. It's not going to be easy." Lucas heard Frank's footsteps descending the porch steps. Before he reached his bike, Lucas called out, "Frank?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for not treating me like I'm broken." There was a pause, then Frank's voice came back, softer than before. "Kid, you're anything but broken. That's why I'm doing this." The motorcycle roared to life, and Lucas listened as it faded into the distance. His heart was racing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow he wouldn't just be the blind boy who needed protection. He would start learning how to protect himself and the people he cared about. Lucas picked up his guitar again, but this time, the melody that flowed from his fingers carried a new strength. He might not be able to see the danger coming, but he would be ready for it all the same. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Lucas and Frank sat on a wooden bench outside the cafe. Their daily meetings had become a ritual, something both looked forward to despite the cloud of Tony's threats hanging over them. Frank's weathered hands wrapped around his coffee cup, the warmth seeping into his calloused fingers. "My boy would have been about your age now," Frank said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes I wonder what kind of music he would have liked." Lucas tilted his head, listening intently. "What was his name?" "Michael." Frank's voice cracked slightly. "He loved the guitar, too. Started learning when he was 6. Lucas reached out, his hand finding Frank's arm with surprising accuracy. "Tell me more about him." Frank took a deep breath, the memories he'd kept locked away for so long finally finding their way out. He was always smiling, even when things were tough, had this way of making everyone around him feel better. He paused, swallowing hard. "After the accident, I couldn't handle it. Started running with the wrong crowd, thinking it would make the pain go away." "Did it?" Lucas asked quietly. "No," Frank admitted. "Just made everything worse." Lucas nodded, understanding in his expression. "Mom tries to hide how bad things are sometimes. I can hear it in her voice, though, when she thinks I'm sleeping, the way she cries at night." Frank watched the young boy's face, seeing the same worry he used to carry. "You shouldn't have to deal with all this at your age, kid." "Neither should you have," Lucas replied, his words striking Frank like a physical blow. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of passing cars and distant chatter filling the air. Frank found himself sharing stories he hadn't told anyone, about his marriage falling apart after Michael's death, about the guilt that drove him to join the hellsangels, about the mistakes that led him to Tony. Lucas, in turn, opened up about his own struggles. He talked about the kids at school who didn't understand him, about learning to navigate the world without sight, about lying awake at night worried about his mother's health. As evening approached, Frank made a decision. "Come on, kid. I want to show you something." They walked to the Iron Horse, a small bar where Frank was known by everyone. The familiar smell of leather and motor oil filled the air as they entered. The usual rough chatter quieted for a moment before erupting in warm greetings. "Hey, look who's here!" Big Pete, one of the older bikers, called out. "It's the singing kid!" Lucas smiled, surprised by the friendly welcome. Frank guided him to a corner booth where some of his closest friends sat. They immediately made room, treating Lucas like he'd always been part of their circle. "You should hear this kid sing," Frank told them proudly, his hand resting on Lucas's shoulder. The boy blushed but sat up straighter, feeling accepted. As the evening went on, Frank watched Lucas joke with the bikers, his initial shyness melting away. The boy's genuine warmth seemed to bring out the best in everyone around him. Even the toughest riders softened their voices and shared stories with him. Sitting there, watching Lucas fit so naturally into his world while somehow making it better, Frank felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The kind of hope that made him think maybe he wasn't beyond saving after all. The morning air felt heavy with tension as Frank stood in Lucas's living room. His weathered boots scuffed against the worn carpet while he shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the lie he was about to tell. Sarah watched from her usual spot on the couch, wrapped in a thick blanket despite the warmth of the day. "Just some business I need to take care of," Frank mumbled, not meeting Lucas's eyes. "Nothing to worry about." Lucas's fingers tightened around the arm of the chair. Even without sight, he could sense the strain in Frank's voice. "How long will you be gone?" "Not sure, but I need you to promise me something, kid." Frank's voice grew stern. "Stay here with your mom. Don't try to follow me. Don't ask questions. Just stay put." Sarah coughed softly, drawing both their attention. "Frank, whatever this is about—" "It's fine," Frank cut her off, his tone gentler now. "Everything's going to be fine." Lucas heard the familiar jingle of Frank's keys and the heavy tread of his boots as he moved toward the door. The sound of leather creaking told him Frank had put on his riding jacket. Each noise felt final, like pieces of a puzzle Lucas didn't want to complete. "Frank," Lucas called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Be careful." The door closed with a soft click, and moments later, the rumble of Frank's motorcycle filled the street before fading into the distance. Lucas sat perfectly still, listening to the engine noise until it disappeared completely. His heart hammered in his chest as he counted the minutes. "Mom," he said finally, "I need some air." "Lucas," Sarah's voice held a warning. Frank said, "Just to the porch," he lied, hating himself for it. "I promise." Outside, Lucas used his cane to navigate the familiar streets. He'd memorized the sound of Frank's motorcycle, the distinct rhythm of its engine, the way it echoed off buildings. Following it wasn't easy, but Lucas had learned to trust his ears more than most people trusted their eyes. The sounds led him through town, past the busy main street, and into the industrial district where empty warehouses stood like silent sentinels. The motorcycle's rumble had stopped, but now Lucas picked up other sounds. Car doors slamming, voices speaking in low tones, footsteps on gravel. Lucas crouched behind what felt like a dumpster, his heart pounding so loud he worried it might give him away. The voices grew clearer as he strained to listen. "You made the right choice, Frank," Tony's smooth voice carried across the empty lot. "Wouldn't want anything to happen to that kid and his mom, would we?" "Let's just get this over with," Frank growled, but Lucas heard the defeat in his voice. More footsteps approached. At least 4 or 5 other men, Lucas guessed. Their shoes crunched on broken glass and gravel as they moved toward what must have been the warehouse entrance. Metal hinges creaked as a door opened. "After you," Tony said, false courtesy dripping from his words. Lucas pressed himself harder against the dumpster, trembling. The sound of multiple footsteps faded into the warehouse, and then silence fell over the lot. He felt small and helpless, knowing Frank was walking into something dangerous but unable to do anything about it. The weight of his own uselessness pressed down on him like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe. He wanted to run in there, to warn Frank, to do something. Anything. But what could a blind teenager do against a group of dangerous criminals? For the first time since losing his sight, Lucas truly felt the full extent of his limitations, and it terrified him. The night air hung heavy with autumn's chill, as Lucas tossed and turned in his bed. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the scene from the warehouse playing over and over. Frank's hulking figure meeting with Tony and his gang, their shadows dancing ominously on the warehouse walls. Sleep was impossible. Lucas pushed himself up and felt for his cane by the bedside. His mom's steady breathing from the next room told him she was finally resting after another difficult day of treatment. He needed to clear his head. Grabbing his jacket, Lucas made his way out into the night. The familiar streets felt different now, charged with an electricity that made his skin prickle. His cane tapped rhythmically against the sidewalk as he walked, each step carrying him closer to the town square. The square was usually quiet this late, but tonight Lucas heard voices coming from near the old gazebo. He slowed his pace, recognizing one of them as Mickey, one of the younger guys from Frank's motorcycle club. "Frank's got no choice now," Mickey was saying in a low voice. "Tony's got him by the throat with this weapons deal." Lucas froze, his heart hammering in his chest. "Yeah, but running guns," another voice responded. "That's way beyond what we usually do. If the cops catch wind of this—" "Keep your voice down," Mickey hissed. "Look, Frank's doing this to protect that blind kid and his mom. Tony threatened to hurt them if Frank didn't play ball." Lucas felt the blood drain from his face. His fingers tightened around his cane until his knuckles hurt. Weapons. Guns. The words echoed in his mind, making him feel sick. Frank wasn't just making a deal. He was getting involved in something that could land him in prison. Without thinking, Lucas turned and headed straight for Frank's apartment above the auto repair shop. His cane struck the ground with more force than necessary, matching the angry rhythm of his thoughts. The cool night air did nothing to calm the heat rising in his chest. He found Frank's door and knocked hard. After a moment, he heard heavy footsteps approaching. "Lucas?" Frank's voice was rough with surprise. "What are you doing here so late?" "I know about the guns," Lucas said, his voice shaking. "I heard Mickey talking in the square." The silence that followed was deafening. Lucas could hear Frank's breathing change, becoming more controlled, more guarded. "You shouldn't be out this late," Frank finally said, his tone flat. "Don't do that," Lucas shot back. "Don't treat me like a kid who doesn't understand. You're running guns for Tony? That's your solution?" "You don't understand what's at stake here," Frank growled. "I understand perfectly." Lucas's voice cracked with emotion. "You're throwing your life away. And for what? To protect us? We never asked for this." "I made my choice," Frank said firmly. "I'm doing what needs to be done." Lucas felt tears of frustration burning behind his eyes. "No, you're taking the easy way out. You're falling back into old habits because you're scared to face things any other way." "That's enough!" Frank's voice held a warning edge. "I did what I had to do to keep you and your mother safe. That's all you need to know." Lucas stood there, his chest heaving with emotion, feeling the gulf widening between them. The man who had become like a father to him suddenly felt like a stranger. "Maybe," Lucas said quietly, "but I'm not sure I can believe in you anymore." Lucas sat in the hospital waiting room, his fingers drumming nervously against the armrest. The sterile smell of disinfectant filled his nostrils as he waited for news about his mother's latest test results. The doctor's footsteps echoed down the hallway, getting closer. "Lucas?" Dr. Martinez's voice was gentle, but carried a weight that made Lucas's heart sink. "We need to talk about your mother's condition." The doctor sat next to him, papers rustling. "The treatment isn't working as well as we'd hoped. The medication seems to be losing its effectiveness, and we're seeing some concerning patterns in her blood work." Lucas's throat tightened. "But we have the money now. We can pay for whatever she needs." "It's not just about the money anymore," Dr. Martinez explained. "We need to consider more aggressive treatment options, possibly even transferring her to a specialized facility." Just then, Lucas's phone buzzed. A text message from Frank. "Meeting with Tony tonight. Stay away from the warehouse district." The pieces started falling into place. The money that was supposed to save his mother had come with strings attached. Dangerous ones. Frank's involvement with Tony and his gang wasn't just about past debts. It was ongoing. Every dollar they spent on Sarah's treatment was tainted with the risk of violence and illegal activities. Lucas made his way to his mother's room, his cane tapping against the linoleum floor. Sarah was awake, propped up against her pillows, looking more fragile than ever. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "We need to talk." He sat on the edge of her bed, feeling the warmth of her hand as she reached for his. "The treatment isn't working like it should," he began, then paused to steady his voice. "But there's something else you need to know about Frank." Lucas told her everything, about overhearing the warehouse conversation, about Tony's threats, about the illegal activities Frank was involved in to keep helping them. His words tumbled out, heavy with fear and guilt. "He's not just trying to help us anymore, Mom. Every time he does something for Tony, it puts us all in more danger. And now," he swallowed hard, "now the money isn't even enough to make you better." Sarah listened quietly, her hand tightening around his. When he finished, she took a deep, shaky breath. "Oh, Lucas," she whispered. "This has all gone so wrong." "I thought Frank was our miracle," Lucas admitted, his voice small. "But his help is making everything worse. Tony's people have been watching the hospital. I can hear them sometimes, talking in the parking lot." Sarah pulled herself up straighter in the bed. "We need to find another way," she said firmly. "We can't let Frank destroy himself trying to save us, and we can't let his choices put you in danger." "But how?" Lucas asked, his voice breaking. "We don't have anywhere else to turn." "There's always another way," Sarah insisted, though her voice trembled. "We need to distance ourselves from this situation before it gets worse. Promise me you'll help me figure this out, Lucas. Promise me we'll find a different path." Lucas nodded, feeling both terrified and relieved to have finally shared everything with his mother. The weight of keeping Frank's secrets had been crushing him, and now that the truth was out, they could face it together. Lucas sat at the kitchen table, his fingers tracing the edge of his guitar case, while Sarah packed their few belongings into a worn duffel bag. The sound of zippers closing and drawers shutting filled their small apartment with a sense of finality. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's hands trembled as she folded another shirt. "We don't have a choice, sweetheart. Frank's world, it's too dangerous. We can't get caught up in it." The familiar rumble of a motorcycle engine grew louder outside their window. Lucas's heart sank. He knew that sound all too well. Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs, and then came the pounding at their door. "Lucas, Sarah!" Frank's voice boomed through the thin wood. "Open up, please!" Sarah froze, clutching a handful of clothes. Lucas stood up, but his mother grabbed his arm. "Don't," she whispered. The pounding continued. "I know you're in there. I can help fix this." Lucas pulled away from his mother's grip and moved toward the door. Despite her protests, he turned the lock and opened it. Frank stood there, his massive frame filling the doorway. His face was lined with worry, his usual tough exterior cracking. "You can't leave," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We have to," Sarah replied firmly, stepping between Frank and Lucas. "Your problems are putting my son in danger." Frank's shoulders slumped. "Everything I did was to protect you both. The money, the deals with Tony, it was all to keep you safe." "Safe?" Sarah's voice cracked. "There are strange men watching our apartment. Lucas overheard things at that warehouse that scared him half to death. This isn't safety, Frank. This is a nightmare." Frank ran a hand through his graying hair. I made mistakes. I thought I could handle Tony, keep him away from you both. But I was wrong. His voice broke. When I saw Lucas singing that day, it reminded me so much of my boy. I couldn't just walk away. Lucas felt tears welling up in his eyes. You tried to help us, Frank. But now we need to go, Sarah finished firmly. She picked up their bag and Lucas's guitar case. Whatever's coming, we can't be here when it happens. Frank took a step forward, his hands outstretched. Please, let me make this right. I can still fix this. How? Sarah demanded. By making more deals? Getting deeper into trouble? We appreciate what you tried to do, Frank, but we need to leave, now. Lucas could hear the pain in Frank's breathing, the slight catch that betrayed his emotions. I never meant for any of this to happen, Frank said quietly. I just wanted to help. We know, Lucas said, reaching out to touch Frank's arm. But Mom's right. We have to go. Sarah took Lucas's hand and guided him toward the door. Frank stepped aside, his massive frame seeming to deflate as they passed. The bus station, he said quietly. At least let me drive you there. No, Sarah replied firmly. It's better if you don't know where we're going. They walked down the stairs in silence, Frank watching from above. Lucas could feel the weight of his mentor's gaze on his back, could sense the regret and pain radiating from him. But they kept walking, step by step, away from the man who had tried to save them and had instead pulled them deeper into darkness. Outside, the autumn air bit at their faces as they headed toward the bus station, leaving Frank and his dangerous world behind. Lucas clutched his mother's arm, his guitar case bumping against his leg with each step, wondering if they'd ever see Frank again. Frank's motorcycle roared through the quiet streets of the early morning, his heart pounding as he searched for Lucas and Sarah. He spotted them near the bus station, their small collection of bags packed beside them on a wooden bench. The sight made his chest tighten. He pulled up to the curb, killing the engine. Sarah instinctively pulled Lucas closer as Frank approached, her thin frame trembling slightly in the morning chill. Please, Frank said, his voice rougher than usual. Just hear me out. Lucas turned his face toward Frank's voice, his expression a mix of hurt and hope. We can't stay here with Tony threatening everyone, Lucas said quietly. Frank ran a hand through his graying hair. I know I messed up. Been messing up for years now. He took a deep breath, looking at the mother and son before him. But running isn't the answer, not this time. Sarah spoke up, her voice weak but determined. We can't risk Lucas's safety, or mine. We barely have enough. For the bus tickets, but... I made a promise, Frank interrupted, kneeling down in front of Lucas. Remember what I told you about my son? About how I couldn't protect him? His voice cracked slightly. I've been running from that pain for so long, trying to bury it in all the wrong places. But you... He placed a gentle hand on Lucas's shoulder. You showed me there's still good in this world worth fighting for. Lucas's fingers fidgeted with the hem of his jacket. But Tony doesn't own me, Frank said firmly. I let him think he did because it was easier than facing my demons, but I'm done running, done hiding. He turned to Sarah. I know you don't trust me. You've got every right not to, but I'm asking you to give me one more chance. Sarah studied Frank's face, searching for any sign of deception. What are you planning to do? I'm going to end this. Clean break from Tony and his whole operation. Frank stood up, his shoulders squared. No more deals, no more favors. I'm walking away. He won't let you, Lucas said, worry evident in his voice. Maybe not, Frank admitted. But I have to try. Not just for me, but for both of you. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You two gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. A reason to be better. To do better. Lucas reached out, finding Frank's arm. You could get hurt. Some things are worth the risk, kid. Frank covered Lucas's hand with his own. Stay here in town. Give me 24 hours to make this right. If I haven't fixed things by then. He swallowed hard. Then you can leave, and I won't try to stop you. Sarah stepped forward, her voice stronger now. You really think you can end things with Tony? I have to, Frank said simply, because the alternative means losing the only family I've got left. The word family hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lucas's grip on Frank's arm tightened. Promise you'll come back? Frank's throat constricted. I promise, kid. One way or another, I'm coming back. He helped them gather their bags, carrying them back to Sarah's small house. As he loaded the last bag into the trunk of Sarah's car, he knew what he had to do next. Tony would be at his usual spot, and Frank needed to face him one final time. Frank stood in the dimly lit warehouse, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the concrete floor. The air was thick with tension as he faced Tony, who lounged against a wooden crate with a deceptively casual air. Two of Tony's men flanked him, their hands hovering near their jackets. You're making a mistake, Grizzly, Tony said, his voice smooth as silk but edged with menace. After everything we've been through, you want to throw it all away for some blind kid and his sick mother? Frank's jaw tightened. I've made plenty of mistakes in my life, Tony. This isn't one of them. Tony pushed off the crate and stepped forward, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor. Let me remind you of something. That money you gave the kid, that wasn't yours to give. You owe me, and I always collect my debts. Not this time. Frank's voice was steady, though his heart hammered in his chest. I'm done, all of it. The deals, the runs, everything. A flash of anger crossed Tony's face. You don't get to walk away. That's not how this works. I'm not asking permission. Frank took a step forward, his hands clenched into fists. I've lost too much already. My son, my life, my soul, but that kid? He showed me there's still good in this world. I won't let you destroy that. Tony's men reached for their weapons, but Tony held up a hand to stop them. Think carefully about what you're doing, Frank. That boy and his mother, they could have accidents. Terrible things happen every day. Something snapped inside Frank. In 2 quick strides, he crossed the space between them and grabbed Tony by his expensive jacket, lifting him off his feet. Tony's men drew their guns, but Frank didn't care. Listen carefully, Frank growled, his face inches from Tony's. If anything happens to them, anything at all, I'll make sure everyone knows about the shipments, the routes, the buyers, everything. He pulled Tony closer. And then I'll come for you personally. Tony's face went pale. The threat wasn't empty. Frank knew too much, had been involved in too many operations. The damage he could do would be catastrophic. You're bluffing, Tony whispered, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Frank's grip tightened. Try me. I've got nothing left to lose except them, and I'll burn down heaven and hell to keep them safe. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic and Tony's rapid breathing. Finally, Tony gave a slight nod to his men, who lowered their weapons. Let him go, Tony said quietly. Frank released him, watching as Tony straightened his jacket with trembling hands. We're done, Frank said. All debts are cleared. I never want to see you near me or them again. Tony studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Get out of here, Grizzly. Consider yourself lucky. Not many men walk away from this life. Frank turned and walked toward the exit, his steps echoing in the warehouse. He didn't look back, didn't acknowledge the men watching him leave, With each step, he felt the weight of his past falling away, replaced by something lighter. Hope. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Frank took a deep breath of the cool evening air, feeling truly free for the first time in years. It was time to go home, not to his empty apartment or the clubhouse, but to Lucas and Sarah. To his new family. Frank sat in the hospital waiting room, his large frame looking oddly out of place in the small plastic chair. His leather jacket was draped over the back, and his weathered hands clasped together as he waited. The sterile white walls and antiseptic smell were a far cry from the rough environments Hum was used to, but he'd gotten familiar with this place over the past few weeks. Lucas sat next to him, his guitar case propped against the wall. The boy's fingers tapped quietly against his knee, a habit Frank had noticed he did when he was nervous. Today was Sarah's latest checkup, and they were both hoping for good news. "You doing okay, kid?" Frank asked, his gruff voice softened with concern. Lucas nodded, turning his head toward Frank's voice. "Yeah, just want to hear what the doctor says." A nurse called them in, and Frank gently guided Lucas with a light touch on his shoulder. Inside the examination room, Sarah was sitting up on the bed, looking tired, but with more color in her cheeks than Frank had seen in weeks. Dr. Matthews stood nearby, reviewing some charts. He looked up as they entered, offering a small smile. "The latest test results are encouraging," he said. "The treatment is starting to show positive effects. Your blood work is improving, Sarah." Frank felt Lucas's shoulder relax under his hand. Sarah reached out and took her son's hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll need to continue the current treatment plan," Dr. Matthews continued, "but I'm optimistic about your progress." After the appointment, Frank drove them home in his old pickup truck. He'd traded in his motorcycle for something more practical, something that could transport all three of them together. Lucas sat between them in the front seat, his guitar across his lap. "Mom," Lucas said as they pulled into their driveway, "can we have dinner together tonight, all of us?" Sarah glanced at Frank, a warm smile crossing her face. "Of course we can. Frank, you'll stay, won't you?" Frank nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Wouldn't miss it." Inside, Frank helped Sarah prepare dinner while Lucas sat at the kitchen table, strumming his guitar softly. The domestic scene was so different from his life just months ago, but it felt right. Natural. "You don't have to keep coming to all these appointments," Sarah said quietly as she chopped vegetables. "I know you must have other things to do." Frank shook his head, focusing on the pot of soup he was stirring. "This is exactly where I need to be." He paused, then added, "Where I want to be." The kitchen filled with the warm aroma of home-cooked food and the gentle notes of Lucas's guitar. Sarah hummed along as she worked, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Frank watched them both, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over him. Later, as they sat around the dinner table, Frank looked at the small family he'd somehow become part of. Sarah was eating with more appetite than she'd shown in months, and Lucas was telling them about a new song he was learning. The weight of his past decisions, the darkness he'd carried for so long, felt distant now. This was what redemption felt like, he realized. Not some grand gesture or dramatic moment, but these quiet evenings, these small acts of care and support. In helping Sarah heal, in being there for Lucas, Frank had found his own healing too. Sarah caught his eye across the table and smiled, a knowing look that told him she understood exactly what he was thinking. He smiled back, grateful for this second chance at family, at doing things right. The autumn leaves danced in the gentle breeze as Frank sat on the front porch of Sarah's modest home, watching Lucas tune his guitar. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered wooden boards beneath their feet. Frank's leather jacket hung loosely on the porch railing, a symbol of the walls he was slowly letting down. "That string still giving you trouble?" Frank asked, leaning forward in his chair. Lucas's fingers moved expertly across the guitar strings. "A little bit, but I think I've almost got it." His face scrunched up in concentration as he made another minor adjustment. Frank smiled, remembering how his own son used to make that same expression when focusing on something important. The memory didn't sting as much as it used to. "You know, I used to play a bit myself back in the day." Lucas's head perked up. "Really? You never told me that." "Never thought it was worth mentioning." Frank cleared his throat. "But seeing you with that guitar every day, well, it brings back good memories." Sarah appeared in the doorway, holding 3 steaming mugs of hot chocolate. Her color had improved since starting the new treatment, and there was a spark in her eyes that had been missing for too long. "Then maybe you should join him sometime," she suggested, handing them each a mug. Frank accepted the drink with a grateful nod. "Maybe I should." Later that afternoon, Frank found himself sitting with Lucas at the kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks and worksheets. Math had never been Lucas's strong suit, but Frank discovered he had a knack for breaking down complex problems into simple steps. "It's like working on a bike," Frank explained, guiding Lucas's hand across the Braille worksheet. "You take it piece by piece, and before you know it, everything fits together." The town library became their regular haunt, with Frank reading aloud from history books, while Lucas absorbed every word. The librarian, Mrs. Peterson, who had once watched Frank warily, now greeted him with a warm smile and saved interesting articles she thought Lucas might enjoy. One particularly memorable evening, as the sun set behind the town's small main street, Lucas started playing Amazing Grace on his guitar outside the cafe, where their story had begun. Without thinking, Frank found himself humming along. His deep, gravelly voice blended surprisingly well with Lucas's clear, youthful tone. People stopped to listen, and soon a small crowd gathered. There was no judgment in their eyes anymore, no fear of the tattooed man in their midst. Instead, they saw what Lucas had seen all along, a man seeking redemption through small acts of kindness. The cafe owner, Tom, brought out coffee for everyone, and what started as a simple duet turned into an impromptu community gathering. Frank watched as Lucas's confidence grew with each song, his smile brightening the darkening evening. Mrs. Wilson from the flower shop wiped tears from her eyes as Lucas finished another song. "You two make quite the pair," she said, patting Frank's arm. "It's good to see you both here." Frank nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Here he was, the same man who had once struck fear into people's hearts, now sitting on a sidewalk, singing hymns with a blind boy who had somehow become like a son to him. The evening wrapped up with Lucas teaching Frank a new chord progression, their laughter echoing off the old brick buildings. As they packed up the guitar, Frank caught his reflection in the cafe window. The hard lines in his face had softened, and there was a light in his eyes he hadn't seen in years. "Same time tomorrow?" Lucas asked hopefully, slinging his guitar case over his shoulder. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, kid," Frank replied, his heart full as he watched the boy who had changed everything. The morning sun streamed through the cafe windows, casting warm patches of light across the wooden tables. Lucas sat at his usual spot, his fingers drumming nervously against his guitar case, while Frank nursed a cup of black coffee across from him. "You've got nothing to worry about, kid," Frank said, his gruff voice softening. "Your audition tape was perfect." Lucas nodded, but his hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. "I just keep thinking about what it would mean for Mom. The scholarship would cover everything: room, board, lessons. She wouldn't have to worry about me while she finishes her treatment. Frank watched the boy's face, noting how much older he seemed than his 14 years. The past few months had changed them all, but Lucas had grown in ways that made Frank's heart ache with pride. The blind boy who once sat alone on the curb, singing for spare change, had blossomed into a confident young musician. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and Sarah walked in, her steps stronger than they'd been in months. The treatment was working, slowly but surely, and color had returned to her cheeks. She carried an envelope in her hands, and Lucas's head turned toward the sound of her footsteps. "Mom?" His voice wavered. "Is that—" "It just came in the mail," Sarah said, sliding into the booth next to her son. Her hands shook slightly as she held out the envelope. "Would you like me to open it?" Lucas swallowed hard and nodded. Frank leaned forward, his coffee forgotten, as Sarah carefully broke the seal. The cafe seemed to grow quieter, as if everyone present understood the weight of this moment. Sarah unfolded the letter, and Frank could see her eyes scanning the page. Her hand flew to her mouth, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You got in. Full scholarship to the Summer Music Academy in Boston." Lucas sat perfectly still for a moment, processing the news. Then his face broke into a smile so bright it seemed to light up the entire cafe. "Really? Are you sure?" Frank watched as Sarah wrapped her arms around her son, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. The other cafe patrons, many of whom had watched Lucas perform over the past months, broke into applause. "They said your audition tape was exceptional," Sarah continued, wiping her eyes. "They've never had a student with such natural talent and emotional depth in their youth program." Lucas reached out and found Frank's hand across the table. "I couldn't have done it without you, Frank. You're the one who convinced me to make that tape." Frank squeezed the boy's hand, his throat tight with emotion. He remembered the day he'd suggested Lucas record his songs, how the boy had initially refused, convinced he wasn't good enough. But Frank had seen something in Lucas that reminded him of his own son, that same raw talent and determination. "You did this all on your own, kid," Frank managed to say, his voice rough. "You've got a gift that can't be taught. All I did was help you believe in yourself." Sarah reached across the table and took Frank's other hand. "You did so much more than that," she said softly. "You helped us both believe in second chances." Frank looked at their joined hands, his weathered and calloused, bearing the marks of his past life, linked with theirs in a moment of pure joy. This was what redemption felt like, he realized. Not just breaking free from his past, but being part of something good and true and hopeful. The evening sun cast long shadows through the kitchen window as Sarah pulled a homemade lasagna from the oven. The rich aroma of tomatoes and herbs filled their modest home, mixing with the sound of quiet laughter. Frank sat at the kitchen table, his massive frame somehow looking softer these days, more at ease. The leather jacket that once made him look intimidating now seemed more like a comfortable old friend. Lucas perched on a chair nearby, his fingers absently strumming his guitar. "Mom, that smells amazing," he said, tilting his head towards the kitchen. "Even better than Grandma's recipe." "Don't let her hear you say that," Sarah chuckled, setting the dish on the counter. Her movements were stronger now, more sure-footed than they'd been in months. The treatments were working, slowly but surely. Frank watched them both, his weathered face creasing into a smile. The scholarship letter lay on the table before him, and he couldn't stop glancing at it. "Still can't believe it," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "A full ride to the music program. That's something special, kid." "We should make a toast," Sarah announced, pulling out the sparkling cider they'd been saving for a special occasion. To new beginnings. As she poured the golden liquid into glasses, Frank cleared his throat. You know, when I first heard you singing outside, that cafe, I never thought. He paused, wrestling with the words. Never thought I'd find a family again? Lucas reached out, finding Frank's arm with careful precision. You were always meant to be part of our family, Frank. Sometimes the best things come from unexpected places. Sarah set the glasses down and took her seat. To think I was worried about you at first, she admitted to Frank, shaking her head. Now I can't imagine our lives without you. Neither can I, Lucas added, his fingers still moving across the guitar strings in gentle patterns. You've been more than just help, Frank. You've been the father I needed. Frank's eyes grew misty, and he quickly wiped at them with the back of his hand. Come on now, kid. You're gonna make an old biker cry. They laughed together, the sound warm and genuine. Sarah began serving the lasagna, the plates clinking softly against the table. The scholarship letter rustled as she moved it aside, a tangible promise of better days ahead. You know what this moment needs? Lucas asked, straightening up in his chair. His fingers found their position on the guitar strings with practiced ease. One of your songs? Frank guessed, his voice gentle. Lucas nodded, adjusting his grip on the guitar. I've been working on something new, something about family and hope and the way life surprises you sometimes. The first notes filled the kitchen, clear and sweet. Lucas's voice, stronger now than it had been that day outside the cafe, rose with the melody. He sang about second chances and unexpected gifts, about the way love can heal old wounds and create new bonds. Frank and Sarah sat in reverent silence, watching as Lucas poured his heart into every word. The song spoke of their journey together, the fear, the trust, the healing, and finally the joy of finding each other. In Lucas's voice, they heard their own story reflected back at them, made beautiful through his gift for music. The evening light continued to fade outside their windows, but inside, their little family glowed with the warmth of belonging. They had found something precious, a love that had transformed them all, turning their broken pieces into something whole and beautiful. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the window and warming her face. For the first time in months, she felt strong enough to make breakfast. The smell of pancakes filled the small kitchen, and she couldn't help but smile as she heard Lucas and Frank's voices drifting in from the living room. You're holding that guitar all wrong, Frank said, his gruff voice softened by affection. Here, let me show you. I've been holding it this way for years, Lucas protested, but there was laughter in his voice. Sarah peeked around the corner. Frank sat beside Lucas on the worn couch, adjusting the boy's grip on the instrument. His large, tattooed hands were gentle as they guided Lucas's fingers to the proper position. The sight made her throat tight with emotion. Mom? Lucas turned his head toward the kitchen. Are you watching us? Can't hide anything from those ears of yours, Sarah said, walking into the living room. Her steps were steady now, no longer weak and hesitant. Breakfast is almost ready. Frank looked up at her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. You shouldn't be on your feet so much, he said, but his tone was light, teasing. I've spent enough time in bed, Sarah replied. Besides, I feel good today. Really good. Lucas set his guitar aside and stood up. Can I help set the table? Already done, Sarah said, ruffling his hair as he passed. But you can help me bring everything out. Together they carried plates of pancakes, syrup, and fresh fruit to the small dining table. Frank watched them move around each other with practiced ease, his expression soft with wonder. It was still strange to him, being part of this gentle morning routine. "Frank?" Sarah called. "Are you joining us?" He cleared his throat. "Yeah, coming." They sat together, passing plates and talking about simple things. Lucas's music lessons, the weather, plans for the weekend. Sarah noticed how Frank kept glancing at them, as if making sure they were real, that this moment was really happening. "You know," Sarah said, cutting into her pancakes, "I was thinking we could go to the park later. The doctor said walking would be good for me, and it's such a beautiful day." Lucas's face lit up. "Can we bring my guitar? There's this new song I've been working on." "Of course," Sarah said. She looked at Frank. "Will you come with us?" Frank stabbed at a piece of pancake, trying to hide how much the invitation meant to him. "Someone's got to keep an eye on you, too," he said gruffly. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed his hand. The gesture was simple, but spoke volumes. Frank squeezed back, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Lucas tilted his head, listening to the moment of silence between them. A small smile played at his lips as he continued eating his breakfast. The morning light streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over their little family. Sarah watched as Frank helped Lucas clean syrup off his chin, the tenderness in the action making her heart swell. The fear and uncertainty that had haunted them for so long felt distant now, replaced by something new and precious. They finished breakfast together, their laughter and conversation filling the once quiet house with life. As Sarah gathered the dishes, she paused to take in the scene. Frank teaching Lucas a new chord progression, their heads bent together in concentration, the sunlight catching the silver in Frank's hair and the gentle smile on her son's face. It was a simple moment, but it held all the peace and joy she had ever wished for. Lucas sat in the worn armchair by the living room window, his fingers dancing across the strings of his guitar. The afternoon sun warmed his face as he played, each note carrying memories of the past few months. The melody was soft and gentle, like a conversation between old friends. He paused between chords, letting his hand rest on the smooth wood of the instrument. From somewhere in the kitchen, he could hear Sarah humming along as she prepared dinner. The smell of her signature lasagna filled the house, a dish she hadn't been strong enough to make just a few months ago. The sound of her movements, steady and sure, made his heart swell with joy. The rumble of a motorcycle engine drew closer, and Lucas smiled. Frank's bike had such a distinct sound now, not threatening like it had seemed that first morning outside the cafe, but comforting, like the sound of someone coming home. His fingers found the strings again, and he began playing the song he'd sung that desperate morning. But this time, the notes carried hope instead of fear. The melody reminded him of how far they'd come, from that cold curb where he'd sat alone, to this warm home filled with love and second chances. The front door opened, and Frank's heavy boots thudded against the welcome mat. "That's a beautiful song, kid," Frank said, his voice gruff but gentle. Lucas heard him settle into the creaky rocking chair nearby. "I was just thinking about that morning," Lucas said, continuing to play softly. "When you first heard me sing." "Feels like a lifetime ago," Frank replied. The rocking chair squeaked as he moved. "You know, I almost drove right past you that day." Lucas nodded, his fingers never leaving the strings. "I'm glad you didn't." Sarah's footsteps approached from the kitchen. "Dinner's almost ready," she announced, and Lucas could hear the smile in her voice. "Frank, you're staying, right?" "Wouldn't miss it," Frank answered. Lucas felt the warmth of his mother's hand on his shoulder as she passed by. Her touch was stronger now, steady where it had once been fragile. The medical treatments were working, slowly but surely bringing back her strength. The setting sun's warmth continued to paint patterns on his face as he played, and Lucas thought about his upcoming audition for the music program. His fingers moved to that piece now, practicing the intricate melody that might help shape his future. The notes filled the room, and he heard Frank shift in his chair to listen more closely. "You've got that down perfect," Frank commented when Lucas finished the passage. "Almost," Lucas replied, smiling. "Still need to work on the bridge section." "You'll nail it," Sarah called from the kitchen, "just like you always do." Lucas's heart felt full to bursting. Here, in this moment, he had everything he never knew he needed, his mother's health improving day by day, Frank's steady presence filling the father-shaped hole in their lives, and music. Always the music. He turned his face towards the window, feeling the last rays of sunlight on his skin. His fingers stilled on the guitar strings as gratitude washed over him. For his mother's renewed strength. For Frank's guidance and protection. For the chance to pursue his dreams through music. All of it seemed like a miracle he never could have imagined that cold morning outside the cafe. The familiar scent of lasagna grew stronger as Sarah opened the oven. 5 minutes until dinner, she called out cheerfully. Lucas sat quietly by the window, his heart overflowing with appreciation for these precious moments and the people who had helped him find his way to them. Frank stood on his front porch, the morning sun warming his weathered face as he rifled through the day's mail. Bills, advertisements, and then his calloused hands stopped at a thick manila envelope. His name was typed neatly on the front. Frank Grizzly O'Shea. The return address made his heart skip a beat. It was from his old lawyer. He settled into the wooden rocking chair Sarah had insisted on buying him last month. "Every porch needs a proper chair," she'd said with that gentle smile of hers. The envelope felt heavy in his hands, like it carried the weight of his entire past within its crisp folds. Through the screen door, he could hear Lucas practicing his guitar inside. The melody drifted out. Something new he was working on, the notes hesitant but sweet. The sound steadied Frank's nerves as he carefully tore open the envelope. Several documents slid out, topped by a letter. Frank adjusted his reading glasses, the ones he'd finally admitted to needing after Lucas teased him about squinting at everything. The paper trembled slightly in his hands as he began to read. "Dear Mr. O'Shea," the letter began. "I'm pleased to inform you that all pending matters regarding your previous associations have been officially resolved." Frank had to pause, taking a deep breath. The words blurred before him as memories flooded back. The dark years after losing his son, the spiral into violence, the countless nights spent wondering if he'd ever find his way back to something real. Inside, Lucas hit a wrong chord and muttered something under his breath. The sound made Frank smile. The boy was getting better every day, but he was still his own harshest critic. Just last week, Frank had spent an entire afternoon teaching Lucas a new finger-picking technique, their heads bent together over the guitar, patient repetition until Lucas got it just right. Frank returned to the letter, his eyes moving down the page. Legal terms jumped out at him. Full exoneration, charges dismissed, statute of limitations expired. Each phrase felt like another chain falling away, another shadow lifting from his shoulders. The document detailed how his cooperation in bringing down Tony's operation had earned him immunity. His testimony had helped dismantle an entire network of criminal activity. The authorities were satisfied that he had paid his debt to society. A breeze stirred the papers in his lap, carrying with it the scent of Sarah's roses from the garden. She'd planted them when she started feeling stronger, saying every home needed some beauty. Frank remembered how Lucas had helped her, carefully following her instructions on where to dig, his hands covered in dirt, but his face bright with joy. The final paragraph caught in Frank's throat. With this resolution, you are free to move forward with your life without any further obligations or concerns regarding your past associations. Free. The word seemed to hover in the air before him. A tear slid down his cheek, catching in his graying beard. He didn't bother to wipe it away. Through the screen door, he could hear Sarah humming along with Lucas's playing now, their voices blending in casual harmony. The sound wrapped around him like a warm embrace. The letter trembled in his hands as another tear fell, leaving a small, dark spot on the paper. After all these years, after all the running and the guilt and the fear, he was finally, truly free. Lucas adjusted the microphone stand, his fingers finding their familiar place on the guitar strings. The small coffee shop was packed tonight, filled with familiar faces from around town. The worn wooden stage creaked beneath his feet, but he didn't mind. This was where it all began 3 years ago. His hands moved across the guitar with practiced ease as he began to play the opening notes of his mother's favorite song. The same melody that had once been a desperate plea for help now carried a different weight, telling a story of hope and redemption. This song, Lucas spoke softly into the microphone, his voice steady and clear, is dedicated to 2 people who changed my life. He could sense Frank and Sarah sitting at their usual table near the window, where the evening light filtered through the glass. The audience fell silent as Lucas's voice filled the room. It was stronger now, more confident than when he'd first sung on that curb outside. The years of practice showed in every note, in the way his fingers danced across the strings with perfect precision despite his blindness. Sarah sat with her hands clasped together, her health restored enough that she could enjoy these moments without worry. The medication had worked wonders, but it was the love and support surrounding her that had truly brought her back to life. Her eyes glistened as she listened to her son sing, remembering those darker days when she'd feared she wouldn't live to see him grow up. Frank sat beside her, his large frame somehow softer now. He'd traded his leather jacket for a flannel shirt, though his arms still bore the tattoos that told of his past life. But his eyes, once hard and guarded, now held a warmth that anyone could see. He watched Lucas with quiet pride, remembering the scared young boy who'd touched his heart with a song. As Lucas sang, the memories washed over him, the fear and desperation of those early days, the unexpected kindness from a stranger, the dangerous times that followed, and finally, the peace they'd found together. His voice carried all of these emotions, weaving them into the melody that had started it all. The coffee shop had changed, too. Where once there had been suspicious glances at the sight of a Hell's Angel, now there were friendly nods and warm greetings. The town had watched their story unfold, had seen how love and second chances could transform lives. Lucas's fingers moved through the bridge of the song, each note ringing clear and true. He remembered Frank teaching him new chord progressions, spending hours practicing together in their backyard. Those lessons had been about more than music. They'd been about healing, about building trust, about becoming family. The evening light cast long shadows through the windows, but Lucas could feel its warmth on his face. He didn't need to see to know that Sarah was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, or that Frank was sitting straight-backed and proud, trying to hide how moved he was. He could feel their presence, their love, their support. It was as much a part of the music as the notes themselves. As he moved into the final verse, Lucas's voice grew stronger. This wasn't just a song anymore. It was their story. A story of 3 broken people who had found wholeness together. The melody soared through the coffee shop, carrying with it all the hope and love that had brought them to this moment. The music filled the air, and as Lucas sang, He looked over at Frank and Sarah, his family. They smiled back, proud and content, knowing that they'd made it through the hardest part. Together. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story, and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.